Welcome to the studio. This is Katerina Nesterenko. Here's what we're talking about today. Powerful explosions in Crimea, a tanker and an oil terminal hit in Tuapse. Madyar has called on Russians to prepare for blackouts. Zheleznogorsk is in darkness after successful drone strikes on 5 substations. The operation to eliminate Russian occupiers continues in Pokrovsk. The SBU has destroyed Russian warehouses and bases. Heads are rolling among generals in Moscow. Gerasimov is looking for someone to blame for the failures at the front. The occupiers plan to open a drama theater in Mariupol at the site where 600 people died in 2022. Turkey has increased its oil purchases from Iraq and Kazakhstan instead of Russia. All this and more in just a few seconds. But right now, please like this video and subscribe to the Ukraine Today channel so you don't get lost on YouTube. Well then, let's get started. The Kremlin has stated that a meeting between Putin and Trump is not needed at this time. According to Dmitry Peskov, although a meeting is theoretically possible, there are other priorities at the moment.
Hypothetically speaking, it is possible, but right now there is no need for it. At the moment, what is needed is very meticulous work on the details of the problem, to resolve them.
At the same time, Russia continues to demonstrate its nuclear capabilities. At the Sevmash shipyard, a new nuclear submarine cruiser, the Khabarovsk, was launched. According to Russian media, it is capable of carrying up to 12 autonomous nuclear torpedoes. Poseidon, which can strike targets anywhere in the world's oceans. The head of the Russian Ministry of Defense, Andrei Belousov, claims that this submarine will ensure the protection of maritime borders and national interests. Meanwhile, Ukraine is imposing energy sanctions against the occupiers. The commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Matyar Brovdi, hinted that blackout is a game that can be played both ways.
SBS birds. Together with other elements of deep strike, Ukraine's defense forces promise you a rapid, albeit somewhat forced, adaptation. But you'll manage. Matches, flashlights, candles? By the way, take the opportunity to use your favorite battery-powered garlands unexpectedly.
Well then, let's move from words to action. On the night of November 2nd, Ukrainian drones successfully struck 5 substations. There were powerful explosions in occupied Crimea. There were hits on Russian targets there.
Something just hit. Look, over there, it's actually burning in the bear. It went off with quite a bang.
It was also loud in the Kursk region in Zheleznogorsk, where local social media reported a substation being hit and power outages. A substation in temporarily occupied Alchevsk-Luhansk region also came under attack.
This is...
Next, the baton was passed to the Russian city of Lipetsk. Ukrainian drones also traditionally targeted Gograd Orel. It was especially loud in the Krasnodar region. There, the Tuapse marine oil terminal of Rosneft was attacked, including the deep-water berth capable of handling up to 7 million tons of oil per year, as well as the central cargo trestle. Drones also struck airport terminals in Volgograd, Gelendzhik, Saratov, Krasnodar, Sochi, Penza and Samara, which led to the carpet plan being declared at some airports. And at Sochi airport, nearly 20 flights were delayed for up to 11 hours. Passengers were given mattresses, blankets and water. Ukrainian defense forces continue to demonstrate their ability to carry out deep and effective strikes against important enemy infrastructure, including facilities such as power plants, supply depots and communication centers. These operations are carefully planned and executed, aiming to disrupt the adversary's operational capabilities and weaken their ability to sustain military actions. As a result of these persistent efforts, blackouts and power outages in the Russian Federation are expected to become not just isolated incidents, but rather a systematic and recurring problem, significantly impacting both military operations and civilian life. Are you watching us and do you support our fight against the empire of evil? I always enjoy reading your comments. And for now, we continue. Next comes the most interesting part. Russians are adapting to the consequences of Ukrainian drone strikes. For example, in the Belgorod region, the authorities are installing backup generators in case of a total blackout, but residents are massively stealing cables and batteries. The local authorities are in a panic, and
Here we saw that a generator had been installed, but already by morning the cable had been cut, so it will have to be reconnected again.
Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov calls the situation catastrophic and demands strict control and protection of the equipment.
We need to treat this property as if it were our own. Why? Even if it isn't in your possession, if it's on the balance sheet and it's damaged, don't stay silent. Sound the alarm everywhere. These are our people. Without this equipment, there will be no electricity. That's it. So when they can't manage to the fullest, we help. Like we just discussed, no. Rossetti's cable hasn't arrived yet, but we have it. Let's give it to them. Now is not the time to sort things out. We just need to act quickly, very quickly. Winter will start in a week or two. The problem is catastrophically huge.
And in Krasnodar, when mobile internet is shut down due to drone threats, locals switch to radios. And I
say, don't be sad, don't worry. Please find me a brick, too.
I'm looking.
The Russians are fortifying in Pokrovsk, setting up observation posts in the city. This is reported by analysts from the Deep State portal.
The enemy's infiltration into the city through the defense lines continues. In the south, in the previously mentioned areas along the Zvirove-Shevchenko-Novopavlovka stretch and along the railway from Kotlinova, the enemy is being detected or eliminated in various areas of Pokrovsk, which expands the gray zone of its sabotage and reconnaissance activities. This was reported by Deep State.
However, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, stated that despite Russian claims, there is currently no encirclement or blockade of Pokrovsk and Mirnorad. In
the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad agglomeration, our soldiers have to hold back the pressure of a multi-thousand-strong enemy force, which continues to attempt to infiltrate residential areas and cut off our supply routes. However, there is no encirclement or blockade of the cities. We are doing everything to ensure logistics. A comprehensive operation to destroy and push enemy forces out of Pokrovsk is ongoing.
Meanwhile, the decorated Pushilin is strutting around, trying to showcase the so-called success of the Russian army near Pokrovsk. But in reality, he recorded his video 32 kilometers away from the front line. His geolocation in Osheretine was identified by journalist Yulian Rybkin.
The situation is unfolding not just with difficulty, but with heavy fighting, urban combat, yet nevertheless, we can see that our unit is advancing forward.
It is known that significant losses in the Pokrovsk direction forced Russia to withdraw the 155th Marine Brigade, which had previously operated in the Kiev region. Meanwhile, agents of the partisan movement Atesh and members of the 115th Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces set fire to their own military truck in order to disrupt their deployment for the assault near Pokrovsk.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
In addition, Atesh agents operating within Russia's 51st Combined Arms Army report that the command has ordered the execution of their own female soldiers for refusing to go into battle. In the
Pokrovsk direction, the Russian command has issued an order to execute female soldiers who refuse to carry out combat missions.
Meanwhile, the Russian Ministry of Defense is reporting a victory in the Kupiansk direction on its official channel. Supposedly, a strike was carried out there against the 16th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. But there's a catch. Such a brigade simply does not exist in the armed forces of Ukraine. Meanwhile, analysts from the Deep State portal report that Ukrainian defense forces have pushed back the Russians near Novoshakov in Donbas. However, the enemy has occupied Novohriorivka in Zaporizhzhia. Nevertheless, our defenders continue to deliver devastating blows to the enemy. The Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, attacked Russian warehouses and bases with drones in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. It is known that concentrations of equipment and personnel, which were used for logistics and the distribution of enemy forces, were hit. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front and standing up to a vast horde that greatly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine, and if you can't do so financially, write them words of encouragement in the comments. I know they're watching us. Meanwhile, in Russia itself, generals are losing their heads. Gerasimov is in a frenzy, looking for someone to shift the blame for failures at the front. And essentially, there are lies about having defeated, captured, and surrounded everyone. Due to the failure to accomplish offensive objectives in the Pokrovsk direction, the commander of the 51st Army, Lieutenant General Sergei Melchakov, has been dismissed from his post. In addition, it has become known that the commander of the 132nd Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade of the same army, Colonel Naimushin, has also been removed from his position. The reason for the dismissal is heavy personnel losses. Meanwhile, the very fate of Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov is hanging by a thread. Putin will dismiss him if the occupiers do not capture Pokrovsk by mid-November, and they will not capture it. A successor for Gerasimov has already been chosen. Details in our report.
The last leg of Valery Gerasimov's chair has broken. The Atesh movement, citing information from officers of one of the Russian military groups, reports that the Kremlin is very dissatisfied with the general's work and, to put it mildly, his untruthful reports from the front.
Putin has given Gerasimov a deadline to capture Pokrovsk by mid-November. This order is the general's last chance to keep his position. Against the backdrop of this ultimatum, there has been a sharp intensification on the Pokrovsk direction. Human wave assaults are being used. The command is throwing massive waves of personnel into suicidal attacks in order to fulfill the order at any cost.
Unattractive, lacking charisma, Valery Gerasimov, the man to whom Putin owes his first presidential term. It was he who, while Moscow was preparing to check boxes on ballots, commanded the combat operations for the village of Komsomolskoye. This 15-day-long battle became the key and final one in the Russian Second Chechen campaign. Gerasimov delivered victory to candidate Putin, marching over the numerous corpses of Russian soldiers and local residents.
The residents were allowed to leave the village, but they were not allowed to go far. They were forced to stay for several days outside the outskirts of the village. In fact, they were being used as a human shield. In
2012, it was Gerasimov who presented the country's leadership with the formula for hybrid warfare. At that time, he insisted that it was necessary to move away from classical wars toward destabilization on the ground.
Its approach lies in the active use of the protest potential of the fifth column.
A little later, the Gerasimov formula was tested by the Russians first in Crimea and then in Donbass. According to Bellingcat investigators, it was Valery Gerasimov himself. In 2014, he was the initiator of sending regular Russian troops to Ukrainian Ilovaisk and transferring Russian military equipment to the separatists. It was from this equipment, by the way, that the Malaysian Boeing was shot down. Mute Gerasim, as the Grey Cardinal of the General Staff is called among themselves, has outlasted all his prominent and outspoken critics.
All those who don't give us ammunition will eventually rot in hell, and they'll definitely get screwed. We're short on ammunition by 70%. Shoigu, Gerasimov, where are your supplies?
Prigozhin has been blown up, Strelkov Gherkin is rotting behind bars. After the scandal, it was thanks to the efforts of Valery Gerasimov that the favorite of Russian Zed patriots, General Popov, was sent there. Even Shoigu was removed from the Ministry of Defense, but the mute Gerasimov is still sitting in his chair. Although rumors of his dismissal have been spreading actively since last summer, and now supposedly there are actually grounds for them. If Gerasimov fails to capture Pokrovsk, he will be replaced. By mid-November, someone else will take his place, Viktor Viktorovich Paznikir, who was born and raised not far from the Ukrainian city of Sumy. Not much is known about him. He was awarded the Order of Zhukov by a classified decree, and in February 2024, he received the rank of Colonel General.
It's hard to call this military leader a public figure. His name was first mentioned in the media after the start of the operation in Syria. The Lieutenant General held the position of First Deputy Chief of the main operational directorate of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces. His briefings were dedicated to the situation around Palmyra and Aleppo. Paznikir also spoke about the work of the Russian military police in the Middle East and criticized the presence of the US Navy in the region. The Lieutenant General's statement about US plans to develop a global missile defense system caused a major stir. At the Moscow Conference on International Security, Paznikir called Washington a likely adversary of Moscow. To overcome missile defense, Viktor Viktorovich proposed using the Sarmat and Avangard systems.
It is still unknown whether Gerasimov will be able to outsmart his adversaries again and hold his position. Since the summer, the occupiers have been amassing troops in the Pokrovsk direction and probing for weak spots in the Ukrainian defenses. On their side are Russia's vast resources, which they spare no expense to achieve their goals, and a huge number of gentlemen. Good luck. who were enticed by the contract and the new status of hero. And in 2025, Pokrovsk could become an important and decisive battle, just like the Chechen village of Komsomolskoye once was.
US President Donald Trump made a bold statement after meeting with PRC Chairman Xi Jinping. He called the talks excellent for both sides and stated that they would lead to everlasting peace. The meeting took place in Busan, South Korea, and was the first in-person meeting between the two leaders since 2019. They discussed ways to resolve the war in Ukraine and agreed to continue the dialogue. Trump rated the talks 12 out of 10. Against the backdrop of new sanctions against Russia, Turkey is sharply reducing its dependence on Russian oil. According to Reuters, the country's largest oil refinery, owned by an Azerbaijani company, it purchased 4 batches of crude oil from Iraq, Kazakhstan, and other countries for delivery in December. The volumes range from 77,000 to 129,000 barrels per day. I should note that previously, almost all the raw materials at this plant came from Russia. Finland will conduct a large-scale military exercise involving about 15,000 servicemen, which will take place from November to December in regions including those bordering Russia. And in Russia, there is real panic about this. In particular, the authorities of Karelia are forming people's militias to assist border guards on the border with Finland. This was announced by the head of the republic, Artur Parfenchikov. Our journalists know all the details.
Acting proactively, Finland is deploying 15,000 troops to the border with Russia. The Finns are preparing for the largest series of military exercises this year. Conscripts, reservists, career military personnel, as well as units from allied countries Sweden and the United Kingdom will take part in them. As reported by the country's ground forces, the purpose of the maneuvers is to test the army's readiness to defend the state and to strengthen cooperation with NATO allies.
Aggressive actions from the occupying country. On the territory of the occupying country, in close proximity to Finland's borders, there is currently intensive engineering construction of new military bases by the occupying country's army. We are talking about Petrozavodsk, Kandalaksha and other settlements on the territory of the Russian Federation, which indicate the redeployment of Russian army units. One
of the largest episodes will be the Livolesi Sentry exercise, which will take place in southern Finland from November 27th to December 4th. About 7,000 participants will be involved in it.
The Russian Federation has constantly made it clear to Finland that it poses a threat to this country. Moreover, there has been a constant element of military political pressure on Finland, with the aim, accordingly, of maintaining the so-called neutral status. In other words, there's not the slightest reason to say that friendly, good neighborly relations were established after the occupation of Finnish lands. The Russian military presence near Finland's borders has been constantly increasing.
In the spring of 2023, Finland became a member of the North Atlantic Alliance. This provoked a sharp reaction from Russia, worsening bilateral relations. In addition, Finland imposed sanctions against Russia and refused to grant asylum to Russians fleeing mobilization. After that, Putin's lackeys began blaming the Finns for every sin at every opportunity. For example, in September, former ALCO president Dmitry Medvedev decided that Finland was preparing to attack Russia.
After joining NATO under the guise of defensive measures, Helsinki is pursuing a confrontational course, preparing for war with Russia, apparently setting up a staging ground for an attack on us.
Moreover, according to him, Russia supposedly legally deserves reparations from the Finns for World War II. He claims that back then, the Finns paid too little, thanks to the goodwill of the Russians.
This is precisely an element of diplomatic and military pressure on Finland. Moreover, similar statements are being made not only regarding Finland, but also accordingly regarding Sweden. This concerns the island of Gotland and accordingly also applies to Poland.
Following the alcoholic Medvedev, the chairman of the State Duma Defense Committee, Andrei Kartapolov, also made aggressive statements. He stated, or rather threatened, that Russia is ready to defend itself at any moment since they have everything they need. Medvedev had previously spoken about this as well.
We simply cannot ignore or overlook the important fact that Finland is, at this very moment, currently a member of the North Atlantic Alliance, also known as NATO. This significant status, in turn, predetermines and necessitates certain changes in our military approaches to organizing the border and responding to possible unfriendly acts.
The political and military leaders of Finland are doing everything they can to emphasize that an attack by Russia would be an act of suicidal madness.
The Russian Federation is demonstrating its readiness for a direct confrontation with the NATO bloc. And accordingly, the first countries that will be in the spotlight of the occupying country's army are accordingly Finland and the Baltic states. Therefore, the risks are quite high. This is also evidenced by the formation of new military units in the Leningrad military district, and accordingly the deployment of military infrastructure directly near the borders with Finland.
Earlier, it became known that Finland offered NATO to establish a new military base on its territory. Helsinki could become a base for large NATO reconnaissance drones. In
Mariupol, the Russians are preparing to open a drama theater on the site where around 600 people died in March 2022. Let me remind you, on March 16, 2022, Russian forces dropped 2 powerful aerial bombs on the theater where civilians with their families, including children, were sheltering. In front of the building, the word children was written as a hope for salvation. Now, according to the Mariupol City Council, the occupiers are preparing a grand opening of the drama theater. The restoration work on the building has reached its final stage, and the ceremony, with concerts, performances, and Russian productions, is already planned for December. The Russians want the world to forget that adults and children died beneath these walls, but no facade can hide the truth. This theater stands on the bones of civilians. That's all for now. Please like this video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss any future episodes. See you next time.